I want to welcome everybody today, and I want to welcome our esteemed panelists. We have folks from Alira Health, from Abiomed, from Active, from Grant Thornton, and from Insulet. These are fabulous companies, and we're very thrilled to participate and listen to them today. So we're going to have, first we're going to have a rundown of our new contract manufacturing report. Then we're going to have an interesting panel discussion on supply chain risk management. And then we're going to have our 3 reverse pitches from Active, Abiomed, and Insulet. Let me start again by saying my name is Brian Johnson, and I'm the president of MassMEDIC. And I'm also joined today by Rachel Robinson, our vice president of MassMEDIC. We're thrilled to welcome you here today. The Supplier Showcase is also supported by our great partners and friends over at Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher is part of a collaborative that we participate in called the New England Edge. You probably might not know about it, but MassMEDIC members receive a significant discount on all the vendors that Thermo Fisher works with, as well as a number of key other life science vendors in the community. And it's part of our New England Edge program, and it's a really critical program that we work with MassBio on. So I'm very excited to be able to welcome Mike here today to talk a little bit about Thermo Fisher Scientific. It's a company that I think we've all known them for a long time, but they're almost so big. You might know their name, but you probably don't know all that they encompass. And I've had a great time learning a lot more about this company over the past year as we've been working through this program. So Mike, why don't I hand it over to you, and maybe you can take us through. So as a key premier sponsor of this event, I'm happy to cede the floor to you.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining today. We're excited to partner with MassMEDIC in this way through the New England Edge program. And, we're excited to share a couple updates today. And I won't take up too much of the stage today, but I'll just walk through a little overview of Thermo Fisher in general. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we, as the Fisher Scientific channel, engage with our member companies. So my name is Mike Mandrioli. My title is Industry Manager. And I work in the biotechnology segment, and as well as for managing the New England Edge contracts. So when you think of Thermo Fisher, we're now at the point where we're actually 75 is low. We're actually at now over 80,000 employees through all of our divisions. Over 5,000 of those are R&D scientists and engineers that are helping drive innovation with our commitment to the community. You can see that also we're over 1 billion invested in R&D right now, and our revenues are now over 30 million, considering all of our entities. A number that's not on here that we're starting to add into our slide decks now is 2.5 billion, and that's the number that we've invested into expanding our capacity requirements, to make sure that we can meet some of these demands, increasing supply chains demands that have happened over the last year, 18 months or so. So our mission here is to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer by enabling our customers to do that. And those 3 words really couldn't be more important today than any other time that I can recall working for this company. This is a nice slide I like to show because it shows how we engage with our customers from a visual standpoint, right? So we can reach out to our customers through a lot of divisions, and we can provide a lot of value through tons of different services and products. So whether that's outsourcing enterprise services or expanding R&D through outsourcing through our divisions that we can do that through, there's a lot of ways that we can engage with the customer.
Hey, Mike, can I just stop you real quick? But we're not seeing your slides. Would you mind resharing?
Oh my gosh, you're not seeing them.
Well, you're doing a great job audio-wise.
That's okay. So what are you seeing? Anything?
Just you.
Oh, well, no one signed up for that.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's going around with Teams and Zoom and everything. All right. So this was the slide I spoke to in the beginning with the numbers on there. There's a beautiful little view, which is much better than looking at my face. So I'm sorry that you had to see that. And then this was the visual that I like to share. And here I am talking about a visual and you're not looking at anything. So we put MassMEDIC, we put New England Edge here in the middle to show kind of the web of all the ways that you can engage with Thermo Fisher. In terms of our brands, what do you see on a chemical that you hold in your hand in the lab, or what do you see on the breast of somebody who's working in your lab to help get you some supplies and supply chain demands. So these are the 6 go-to-market brands of Thermo Fisher. Thermo Scientific, of course, the laboratory equipment, instrumentation, and chemicals. Applied Biosystems and Invitrogen from the legacy LifeTech portfolio. And then where I sit is here in this Fisher Scientific division. And that's our division for choice and convenience, for distribution, for enabling our customers to get the products they need when they need it through our channel. Unity Lab Services is our managed services division for managing labs and supply chain, and Patheon is our outsource for pharma services. So what does it mean to work with Fisher Scientific? When you go to fisherscientific.com, what is your goal? Your goal is choice and convenience of obtaining products as fast as you can through our distribution warehouses that are located around the country. And we provide really great training to all of our sales reps so they have technical expertise and can help you find the right products. We have over 2.5 million products within our catalog, and that's not including our third-party aggregation services. We have a state-of-the-art e-commerce platform through fishersci.com, and we can also integrate with other purchasing platforms. And we help you integrate your supply chain to make sure that we can put products on your shelf when you need them so your research and manufacturing can continue. In terms of working with MassMEDIC through the New England Edge program, there's a lot going on. Brian mentioned there's a lot of savings you can engage, not just with Fisher, but with the other suppliers. But as far as Fisher goes, you're talking about getting free freight on everything, including third-party purchases. So that's a really good value add. Commodity discounts across the board. So as part of a consortium, you have that consortium spend buying power. So we look at the spend across all member companies when we're deciding on how we can go to our suppliers and go to bat for our customers and achieve discounts for them. So a little bit of an eye chart down the bottom right here, but these are some of our largest suppliers, which you may not always think of when you think of Fisher. You can get Corning, Oxygen, BD, Fisher Chemical, even some Millipore products through us. So engaging with us is a great way to see, oh, the consortium is spending all of this spend with Ansel and gloves across the board. By using this New England Edge program, you have purchasing power to get really competitive pricing as well as free shipping on these products. And the last thing I'll say is, in terms of rebates, we provide a 2.25% member rebate, and that's back to $1. So all of your spend with Fisher Scientific, as long as it's a catalog product of ours that goes through us through a franchise supplier, which are all of the ones you see here and more, you're going to get 2.25% back on that. So it's a really great program. Like Brian said, the discounts, you're usually going to see anything from 40 to 50% off of list price on consumables. And having your sales rep be really engaged with you and really responsive is going to be the biggest value driver of the whole relationship with us. So that's all I have. Hopefully you can see my thank you slide, because I am saying thank you. It is great to be here. It's great to talk to everyone. And I'll hand the floor over to everyone else. I'm looking forward to the rest of the program today.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your support of this critical program. And if you're interested in learning more about the New England Edge, you can visit our website, massmedic.com. It is a member benefit. So it's as soon as you join MassMEDIC, your company joins MassMEDIC, you are eligible for this program. We just need to onboard you and get you started saving right away. It's a fabulous way in which we can give back to our members. I'm really happy now to transition to a report that in just about a year has become, I think, a real anchor for us at MassMEDIC. And it was the end of 2019, and we talked to our partners at Alira Health and talked to them about creating an intelligence report that really served our industry well, something that was much broader than New England in focus. And what we really came up with was the idea of a state of contract manufacturing report. And it was really because, while this industry is critically important and we all use it every day, there's really not a ton of widely known information on this. So we worked with Alira Health, and we set them loose, and they came back with a phenomenal report that we released last May. And the lead author of that report, Carlo Stimamilio. Did I get it, Carlo?
Perfectly.
I've been working on that all night. Carlo came up with this. I have to say, it's probably one of the best reports I've ever read in terms of it's not only its granularity, but also its focus on this key sector. It came out with great response last year, and Alira has updated the report for 2021. Carlo's going to lead us through this report, and then we'll have a couple questions. You can submit questions also through the chat function. If you have them for it, you can also download this report for free on either our website or Alira Health's, and we'll also send it in the follow-up to the program. So Carlo, why don't you take us through the high levels, and then you and I can chew on a couple things.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Brian. I hope you can see my presentation.
We can, we're
displayed. Good. So my name is Carlo Stimamilio. I'm a partner at Alira Health. I lead our transaction advisory division. And over the past decade, I've had the privilege of working closely with contract manufacturers in the medical device space during a period of very fast growth and very important changes to the industry, and advising medium, small, large CDMOs on strategy development and executing mergers and acquisition deals in a very fast-paced transaction market. And when last year Brian asked us to contribute to create an intelligence report, I felt really excited to put this experience and also the insight from our partner firms and our network to use and to share information, to the industry participants. And so I want to thank MassMEDIC for giving us the opportunity to really take a pause and work on this report and make it available to everybody. A couple of weeks ago, beginning of March, we released the 2021 report, which is basically a glimpse at the current trends and with the particular angle to how COVID has impacted supply chains during 2020 and continuing to 2021, and what can we expect for the rest of the year. So last year, it's almost redundant to remind it, but it was very dramatic. The whole medical device industry was put to a strain by the advent of COVID-19, and particularly at the onset of the pandemic, in the quarter of doom from March to May, June of 2020, very big concerns were raised about the stability, the ability to continue, guaranteeing a flow of products. MedTech companies struggle to ship devices to hospital. Operations were shut down initially overseas but also partially in the US. And there were questions raised about what's the future of supply chain, both captive and outsourced, with regards to the international footprint. Is overseas manufacturing still going to be a viable option to achieve cost advantage, or should we start manufacturing closer to our customers to prevent this crisis from happening again? Well, thankfully, the medical device industry proved very resilient and quite agile to respond to these challenges. And with all the complications that the change in demand of medical devices continue to take place for the whole year, they adjusted, and manufacturing resumed, shipments resumed. And if we look at the overall performance of the industry and also of the CDMO piece of the supply chain, we can see that at the end of the day, 2020 was largely a flat year in aggregate terms. Our estimates indicate that the global MedTech market at a plus 0.9% performance. US-based CDMOs underperformed slightly with a minus 0.8%, but let's say in line with an overall flat performance. Now, this trend is not revealing of the big swings and the variance, and also of the risk and the dramatic months that the supply chain ecosystem went through last year. And if we look more granularly at what is the composition of this performance from a global MedTech perspective, we can definitely see that there were some big winners and some big losers among companies serving particular end markets, right? The two trends that impacted the financials of the industry were largely the deferral of elective procedures, which hospitals stopped booking and stopped performing during practically the whole 2020, and are still catching up at the beginning of 2021, which reduced very significantly orthopedic surgeries, but also non-necessary cardiac and other general surgeries. Whereas all the sectors that were exposed to the surging demand for diagnostic and therapeutic devices for the management of COVID patients had a very, very sharp increase in demand almost overnight. And that is reflected with where the budget of hospitals and where the protocols to manage a surge in COVID patients were directed during the year. And these trends, not surprisingly, our primary research indicates that we're almost almost exactly reflected on the outsourced supply chain industry. So contract manufacturer exposed to these sectors had a very similar experienced a very similar trend in their revenue last year. A glance at the financials of the top MedTech players, which published during the month of February, validate these estimates, right? Where we see big players focus on diagnostics and critical care that had a plus sign, whereas others, most exposed to elective procedures, suffering significant revenue losses. But to speak to the positives and to the resilience of the industry, we would be remiss if we didn't, highlight some great fundamental drivers that keep us optimistic about the future of the industry and of its supply chain. I mentioned demand for critical care equipment, diagnostic tests, both lab-based and point-of-care based, that proliferated to try to give our system means to test people and get this virus under control. And then general, hospital consumables, infection prevention materials, anything related to really the prevention of the spread of the virus and the protection of our healthcare workers. These were all very strong sectors, product categories, and the supply chain and outsourced manufacturers had a key role in adjusting their footprint to enable fast turnarounds and timely delivery of these necessary products. So this was a great sign of agility and flexibility of the industry and of contract manufacturers. Other important trends. The medical device industry saw a very high volume of M&A transactions, particularly of venture-backed companies, which showed commitment to investing in innovation and delivering new products in high-growth markets, even in a context where companies were losing money or were losing revenue. And this is a great glimpse on the long-term focus of the medtech giants, and there is resilient and unscathed by the short-term contingency of a bad financial year. And finally, the startup world, the innovation world, received a record investments from institutional investors. Devices, was in line with the prior years, but the diagnostic sector, with this rush to fund and bring to market new test kits for COVID, was really had a terrific performance. And while a lot of this capital was directed to pre-IPO deals, there was a record fundraise from healthcare-focused venture capitals, which hopefully and we expect will have long-term positive effects and a trickle-down effect into the earlier stage startups, which we hope will benefit the entire system and the developing of important innovation. Let's take a look at our main area of focus, right, which is the outsourced supply chain, contract manufacturing market. We talked about the largely flat performance, slightly negative in aggregate, and the inner trends reflect largely what I've described of the global medtech market. We've focused on the U.S. contract manufacturing industry, and the reason for that was the quality of data. We have relied on interviews and surveys of the market participants to develop this data set. And so we wanted it to be as truthful and as specific to what really happened in the market. And so we did not escalate this to a global overview as we did for our original report last year. But I think what are the important takeaways here? That the industry, proved with this resiliency to the swings on the end market demand, that there are no long-term changes to the trajectory of continued growth that we expect to be in the mid double digits range through 2025. So this was a flat year within a 5-year trajectory of 12 to 15% growth per year, and we expect that to catch up and continue, starting 2021 onwards. What were the winners and the losers here? Again, without dwelling too much on the underlying trends, which I've already spoken about, elective procedures deferred by the hospital caused a loss of revenue, and this was compounded, let's say, by the attempt of OEMs to do some inventory management, and so probably to cut orders by a greater amount than than what the end markets indicated. So contract manufacturers exposed to this sector, particularly the cardiovascular and the orthopedic implants one, suffer significantly. The uncertainty regarding funding of early stage projects, as well as the inability to execute on clinical trials, hampered the ability of design firms to continue the projects that were committed to them, and they also experienced a large slump in revenue. On average, we estimate 12.5%, but I've spoken with some R&D firms around the country, and their revenue losses were in the reached 40-50% in some cases, particularly when related to these markets. On the positive side, the primary processing providers of injection molding and extrusion had a plus sign. Again, this may not show the variance of the big swings in the contributors to this demand, but plastics is the material used in the greatest majority of all medical devices. So it was able to keep on growing, even though probably the mix of products and type of technology was very different than in the past years. And we've already mentioned the boost in the demand for in vitro diagnostic product, both for laboratory-based systems as well as point of care, that had an unprecedented growth last year. And to a large degree, we expect that demand to stick around for 2021 and perhaps even in the near future, as we will continue to need to be tested for even as the vaccines are rolled out, and we will need to keep this pandemic under control. For 2021, we expect largely a catch-up to the long-term growth trends, with elective procedures returning. It hasn't happened fully yet in Q1, but as the numbers of the pandemic get under control, hospitals will begin to perform more surgeries, and already procedures are being booked for the coming months. So we expect a big bounce of the highest value segments of the industry. There will also be a catch-up on inventory programs, with manufacturers and hospitals looking to ramp up their inventory and to ensure timely product shipments that should have a positive effect on outsourced contract manufacturers. And with a more positive general outlook, even R&D projects will resume, and this should have a positive bounce effect on product development services that suffer so much during 2020. So overall, we expect that 2021 will return to a normalized situation. And this is a great achievement, especially in context of what the concerns were when the pandemic began, Q1 of last year. These are kind of the highlights that I've already spoken about. Product development, finishing, assembly are going to be the best performers across end market indications. Whereas the primary processing companies like extrusion or even injection molded then did not have suffer a slump in revenue last year, will probably have a more moderate growth without much catch-up effect to be reached. As a transaction specialist, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the strong activity in the M&A market for medical device contract manufacturers, and the record number of deals that happened last year. This is particularly notable in the context of all the struggles, right, and the concerns regarding the financial stability of the outsourced manufacturing industry. We attribute this volume of deals to the large amount of capital that was invested by private equities in the past years, and as well as the need for larger strategic players to stay ahead of the curve and continue to be aggregators of specific high-value capabilities. So even if we look at the type of deals that were completed last year, we continue to see this data in line with the long-term trends. Primary processing capabilities are still in great demand, and high-value applications in cardiovascular implants and spine and orthopedics, despite a very bad year for the industry, were also the focus of CDMO acquirers last year. And the volume of transaction is not the only interesting factors here, but valuation continued to be very high. And in fact, we compare the past 3 years with the prior 3 years, and unsurprisingly, we witness an increase in median valuation, both as a multiple of revenue and EBITDA. And we can, without going into the detail, we can confirm that this was the case in 2020 specifically as well. And we expect the competitiveness and the appetite for inorganic growth to continue to fuel high valuation. As an outlook for the near-term M&A in the sector, we remain very bullish for 2021. Q1 was a fantastic start of the year with some high-profile transactions already closing, and we expect private equity-backed platforms, even mid and large size, to realize exits this year. So expect for some high-profile deals closing. In the smaller end of the market, I know there are a lot of medium and small CDMOs listening to us today. That is going to continue to be a very sought-after segment by larger and well-funded players. We appreciate the challenges now in finding CDMOs entirely dedicated to medical devices, as opposed to having a mix of industries in their portfolio. But the exposure to medtech will keep you on the radar of acquirers. So expect a lot of phone calls continuously during this year. And with that, I want to be cognizant of time and maybe leave some time for Q&A, Brian. So these are my contact information, as well as my colleagues who co-authored this report with me. And the report can be downloaded from the MassMEDIC website, as well as Alira Health and our other partner for distribution, LSI. So feel free to reach out to me after the event if you have any curiosity or would like to connect.
Great, thank you, Carlo. And why don't you unshare your screen and we can kind of dig into some of these questions, because I have a few and I'm sure some other folks do too. Carlo, just first and foremost, take me through the industry just granularly a little bit. What likelihood is it that if you're a contract manufacturer and you're playing across multiple sectors like IVD and orthopedics or IVD and cardiovascular? I would assume that there's not a ton of those, right?
It varies, right? There are, I think, obviously diversification is in a growing market is a value, but particularly in a down market like 2020 was for many of these industries. And unsurprisingly, the small and medium CDMOs, which make a large part of the U.S. industry, are quite diversified, and so the overall view is that they were able, to a large degree, to navigate this crisis and compensate, revenue loss with revenue gain. But there are definitely there's an emergence of players that are very highly specialized in some applications, and I'm thinking particularly about extrusion specialists, right? That specialize in complex catheters for endovascular procedures. Right, the supply chain in that particular segment tend to be very specialized and focus on high value complex manufacturing processes. So this remark cannot be applied to the entire industry. There were definitely some winners and some losers of these trends, but I would say that the small and mid market was and is diversified enough to hold their ground and hopefully come through 2020 in a good financial state.
Let's just talk about how long it takes for slowdowns in that OEM space to filter through to contract manufacturers. Are those like leading indicators or are those lagging indicators, right? So if you look at, you looked at the sectors that were haves, right? The ones IVD and all and patient monitoring, et cetera. But how long does it take for those gains and losses to filter through? Or so are we going to see? Because I looked at your growth. It was expected 11%. It declined 1%. Was that directly a result of the slowdown? How long does it take to bake in the ups and the downs on this industry?
If you asked me this question in March or April of last year, or any expert really, they wouldn't know, right? Because circumstances changed overnight. There were some infamous instances where companies had to shut down or were unable to ship products and components from Asia, and customers stopped ordering products overnight. And so these were incredible challenges. I think that within a quarter, if we look at just the history, it took a quarter, right, through the summer of last year for the industry really to come out of the swamp and regain some predictability on the flow of merchandise, right, from hospital to OEM to all the way upstream to contract manufacturers. So we only have a limited history of this. I think a quarter of orders is a long enough period in the industry to sort of be an indicator of trends, right? And that's why we're still with a lukewarm beginning of the year on some procedures that were not as strong in the hospital. We're still optimistic about this year because if hospital starts to book patients for surgeries again, then that demand will appear and with positive effects. And I think obviously CDMOs and OEMs work in a very integrated way. So I think that the visibility on the inventory programs particularly is increasing, and I would expect OEMs and CDMOs alike to ramp up for a surge in demand and overall a positive year in 2021.
Just a quick question on that M&A data. Pretty frankly incredible numbers there. I mean, you were looking at huge increases in the number of deals done. let's assume, I'm sure that the deal's done in Q3. Those were probably already in the process. So maybe that's sort of pent up demand, but still seeing a really robust pipeline in terms of contract CDMOs getting acquired. Is it big PE doing roll-ups of small shops, or is it the very big contract manufacturers buying very small guys, or is there mid to mid-tier, small to small M&A happening? Do you have any granularity into that?
It's all of that, really. If anything, very large contract manufacturers, the Jables, the Flexes of the world, have not been very aggressive buyers. So we don't have to look at and they may become in the future as some large private equity backed platforms have reached a meaningful size, the $1 billion mark in revenue, right, and become definitely candidates for large M&A or IPO. But I would say that the aggregators have been definitely private equity sponsored CDMOs. They've been very, very aggressive. Some strategics that have strived to build this vertical integration in particular markets. They were looking for very specific capabilities integrated, and the mid-market is definitely very active. It's also the most challenging and the most competitive space because it's kind of the worst kept secret in the world, right? That this is a very in-demand market, and so sellers know it, buyers know it. Last year, surprisingly, with the overall not so great performance from a financial point of view, may have not been the best year to sell businesses, right? Or even 2021, looking with one bad year in the rearview mirror. For sellers may not be the best time to sell, but demand will stay there, and companies will be tempted to sell at very high multiples. Probably this effect will even be augmented by the attempt to get first on a deal from the buyers, and put on the table very attractive financial terms.
Carlo, again, fantastic report from you and your team. Ladies and gentlemen, we will make sure as when we send out the follow-up for attendees this webinar that you'll have a link to download the report. But as Carlo said, it's available on a few different platforms. Number one is massmedic.com. It's teased on the homepage. You can easily download it there. You can also go to Alira Health. I would recommend you do that. They're a great partner and member, and we love working with them. And this is just one of the first reports they're going to release for us this year. We're excited about this. And you can also see it on Life Science Intelligence, and Carlo's going to be making the rounds to quite a few conferences. So you guys got a great sneak peek here. Carlo, I can't thank you enough for the work your team has done. This report is best in class. Thank you.
Thank you all, and I wish all you guys a great session for the rest of the morning.
Excellent. So I want to go ahead and hand over the reins back to Rachel Robinson. She's the Vice President of MassMEDIC, and she's going to take us through the rest of the programming.
Fantastic. So I hope you all appreciated and enjoyed that as much as I did. And before we shift gears, I just want to remind you that the Q&A is probably the easiest place for questions. So please feel free to pop those in. We've got speakers moving rather quickly, but we do absolutely encourage your questions. So we're going to shift gears to our next topic. And I want to say a welcome to our speakers on this as well, Arthur, Joanne, and Jonathan. So I'm going to turn the reins over to Jonathan Eaton at Grant Thornton to give us an overview of the current scenario for the supply chain and risk management. And then we're going to have Joanne and Arthur share some perspective from Abiomed and Active Surgical on how they're viewing supply chain issues currently. And then we'll make sure we leave some time for Q&A. So Jonathan, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Let me share my screen here. And just confirming you can see.
Looks great.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm Jonathan Eaton with Grant Thornton, lead our national supply chain practice, 24 years of consulting all industries, and so certainly life sciences, pharmaceuticals, but many others as well. And really over the last year with COVID-19, we've seen a lot happen, a lot transpire, and frankly, a lot of companies fail to be adequately and sufficiently prepared for what happened. And so I believe that the focus on supply chain risk management in particular it's certainly grown, and I think it's going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to become more serious. And so what I'd like to do today is just walk through a handful of slides to share some thought leadership and some ideas with you for consideration. And so I think the first thing here is really over the last 5 years, for that matter, the global threats to supply chain security, the integrity of the supply chain, et cetera, those things have tripled actually. When we look at the data, look at the survey, look at the statistics, we see that. And it certainly impacts financial performance. I think with a big enough breach could certainly impact customers. And when that happens, that can deteriorate or hurt the brand, as well as shareholder value. And so I think it's important to really understand, what are some of the common risks? And so cybersecurity, it's getting worse. I'm going to actually cover that in just a second, but technology failures due to inadequate infrastructure, we've seen that even this calendar year, even an example of that. Just supplier financial status, if we think about the liquidity, the solvency of kind of nth degree suppliers within a company's supply chain, ESG, and then just whether it's terrorism or local unrest or fighting or macroeconomic or geopolitical issues that may exist in other countries where suppliers may exist, which offers the threat of disruption of supply chain. And then there's a growing regulatory state, whether it's EPA, the FCPA, other factors out there. I think there's increasing regulation. There's also, I have in front of me, the executive order on America's supply chain. This executive order came out from President Biden on February the 24th, and is about 7 pages long, and pharmaceuticals are listed predominantly in there, along with some other industry sectors. And one of the things that is going to happen over the 100-day period that started on February 24th is all the different secretaries have been ordered to conduct a review of supply chains. And so I've been on probably a dozen calls with Senate staffers, House of Representatives staffers, policymaking team members that work with Congress over the course of the last couple of weeks since this came out. And I think what everyone's trying to figure out is what is this going to mean, and what kind of new regulations are going to come to pass. And I think that if I just look back 6, 8, 9 months ago, at one point in time, I think there were 8 or 9, maybe even 10 pending pieces of legislation around strengthening America's supply chain, protecting it, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that stuff got set to the side with the election. But I fully expect that when we get through this 100-day review, that we will see Congress start to act. And so whether that's new legislation for redundancy, which is one of the things they're looking for, bringing operations onshore, I don't know what it'll be, but I'm sure it's coming. And so I think that then says, what questions do we have to ask? And so those questions are, what data are we going to use to measure and ensure our supply chain is compliant and that we are mitigating risk? How are we going to safeguard data integrity? How are we going to have actionable data so that we can make proactive decisions and be proactive as opposed to reactive? And what does supply chain resiliency mean to any given company? And how do you achieve business continuity? What cadence do you put in place to make that occur? and then ultimately, how able are you to respond to emerging threats? Because I think the threats are going to continue to come. We'll go to the next page. In terms of just recent failures, I told you I would mention one here in particular. I think we all remember the 2015 incident, but with Target. But I think the one just in late 2020 and into 2021 with SolarWinds is enormous. There is a long and even growing to this day list of organizations that were impacted. And I think the scary part when you think about supply chain risk management is you often know who your supplier is, but what you probably don't know is who your supplier's supplier is, and so on. And so if you think about third-party supplier risk to even nth degree supplier risk, what you don't know is what that extended network looks like. And when that happens, you don't know if there were systematic breaches. You also don't know if those companies are using questionable sources of supply, questionable labor policies. The list is long of the number of things that they could be doing wrong. And so I think SolarWinds is an example for all of us of how essential it is to know your supply chain and know what risks are being presented to your organization. The definition of supply chain risk in and of itself is really changing. I mean, if you take a traditional point of view, it was largely focused on IT, trying to protect inventory. Those were the two big things. You were certainly, there was definitely, I think the other one that jumps out here on this page for me is that risks were managed, separately. You had siloed independent functions, different teams that were managing risk, and there was very little cross-pollination within the organization, and that's so essential to manage it well. And if we think about evolving, what's it got to look like in the future? The overarching goal has to be to protect the supply chain structural integrity, protect the customers, protect the internal brand, the reputation of the brand, the shareholders, as I mentioned earlier, and have interconnected systems and capabilities and data that span the enterprise so that you can identify risks across the entire risk ecosystem that you may be facing. It's really also an opportunity for competitive advantage. And I think that's the important thing. I think the companies that get supply chain risk management right in the future are going to be those that are primed for growth and also primed for resiliency when we have more issues arise. What are some of the barriers though? And they're kind of color coded here. There's structural barriers, there's data barriers, and there's cultural barriers. And I think from a structural perspective, a lot of those things can be fixed with, they can be corrected with the right approach within an organization, with the right, kind of supply chain risk management cadence. That's the easier one to fix, as is the organizational and cultural barriers. What's hard to deal with is data, because most organizations we find have limited availability to data, and they often try to go it alone and use the data that they have internally, and don't understand the importance and the criticality of externally sourced data as it relates to some of the threat vectors that they may be facing and how you address those things. The framework, I lay a framework out here for you. It's pretty straightforward. In the center, we've got the risk environment. So we know we're trying to address all of those risks that are within it. But to do that, we've got to assess them. And that's really the second step, is to assess those risks and identify, what are those potential failure modes that may face your organization. And then from there, you can begin to develop a mitigation response. And with a mitigation response comes a responsibility to report and monitor the possibility of those risks occurring and the impact. I think over on the far left, there's the known threats, but there's also the emerging threats. And I think the emerging threats are where external data becomes so powerful and so important. And it improves this entire process in the middle of the page, resulting in a more cost-effective response, but also, essentially improved resiliency. And that's really the goal, right? You've got to have a more resilient supply chain. Next page. So I'm going to put a technology spin on it here. I think, I am a big believer. Now, I don't sell software. Grant Thornton doesn't sell software, and we don't get paid to sell software. So I'm giving you a very independent point of view here when I tell you that I believe there's best in breed supply chain risk management solutions out there that are absolutely just incredibly effective at identifying different risks. And one of those in particular is a company called Interos in Washington, D.C. And Interos started, way back when, and was focused on the war on terror and using data to try to identify people who weren't who they said they were, identify bad actors. And so they figured out that they could use that same type of data analytics to look at supply chain risk factors. And so if you think about their engine, one of the things they have the ability to do is to look deep into your supply chain, your extended supply chain, based on about 120 some thousand different data sources, and identify, where are those trading relationships that you don't have visibility to that exist within your upstream supplier network, and to kind of risk rate, if you will, and give you a point of view on where you have exposure. And I think if you use that, something like that with artificial intelligence that's built into that, and start to integrate that into an offensive mindset where you're offensively trying to drive supply chain risk management into your business to be able to mitigate financial credit risk or financial resiliency or macroeconomic issues or governance or cyber. Those create tremendous opportunities, to try to be able to bring artificial intelligence in, things that most companies don't have today. In terms of, AI-enabled supply chain risk management, the idea is that it's all commercially available data, and it's also transactional, it's social data, geopolitical, supplier, cyber risk profiling, all of those things go into it, along with a operating model design, and implementing that supply chain risk management operating model that has a cadence and a recurring theme, if you will, for identifying the risk and evaluating, consistent with the framework that I showed you a couple of pages ago. And the idea is that you want to create those 24/7 risk monitoring dashboards, so that once you segmented and once you classified the risk and segmented them, you begin to monitor them to be able to identify where those issues may exist. The supplier segmentation is critical. I think just like you wouldn't treat any customer the same, you have different customers that are more important to you and more meaningful based on what they buy or who they are or what that strategic relationship is with your organization. Suppliers are the same. And I think segmenting them appropriately and figuring out how you're going to score them and how you're going to approach supplier risk management, and looking at the data that goes into that's essential. And I think when you start to correlate that back to identification of the risk factors and the threats that could impact your organization, it starts to create the opportunity for really, really effective business continuity planning, that's all ultimately focused on resiliency. And here's some visualizations for you just to make this vividly clear. And what I would say to you on the bottom, we talk about the data universe, the third-party scores, the supplier score, and the risk prioritization. The data universe, so in the center, if this were, company ABC and all of these other areas out here or other companies that maybe are their primary supplier, and then it spans further out to all the companies within their network. And you can't see it here, but these things will light up green, yellow, or red. And when that happens, each one of those data points, that's a supplier of a supplier, at whatever degree of separation within the supply chain, gets a third-party risk score. And then that translates into a supplier score for your individual supplier, and then helps with risk prioritization so that you start to understand where in your supply chain do you have exposure. And then the last thing I want to leave you with very quickly here is what I call, or what we know is SOC for supply chain. And I think SOC for supply chain is pretty important, and it's new. It's very different than a traditional SOC 2. Still uses the trust categories. I'll show those to you on the next page if you don't know what they are. But SOC for supply chain, I think, is important. And here's why I think it's important and it's timely right now. I love to think about what can we do today. I can promise you, I bet you $1 to a dime, that in the next 18 months, you will see legislation. And I don't know which industries will be targeted. I feel like pharmaceuticals will likely be one of them. But I think on the heels of the executive order on America's supply chain, we are going to see legislation that's going to require companies to either certify the strength, the integrity, the resiliency of their supply chain, or it's going to require them to potentially bring certain aspects of it back on shore. Perhaps, maybe that's a supplier Maybe that's an operation. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think it's coming. And I think, when you consider that and you think about, what can you do today? I think evaluating your supply chain and looking at the 5 trust categories of security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy are essential, because I think what you have the opportunity right now to do with a SOC for supply chain study is to be able to certify that your supply chain is secure, that product availability is not an issue, that you don't have systemic process issues or technology issues, that you can protect and maintain kind of confidentiality, and that there aren't any issues with privacy. And I think when you can do that, you probably have more latitude for any new regulations or compliance matters that may come, because you're going to be able to say, hey, we've already certified that our supply chain can be trusted. And so with that, I believe I'm out of time. And Rachel, I'll pass back to you. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Here's my email and my phone number as well, if anyone has a question that I can answer now.
Jonathan. That was fantastic. So we did have a question come in about potential softwares, which you answered. Enteros is a good option for people. Are there any other software that you think are just really at the top of the game for this?
Yeah. There are, and they all are unique. One is Risk Recon, and so what Risk Recon does is uses available data to identify companies that have litigation issues, solvency, financial issues, liquidity, those type of things. And it actually is integrated into Enteros, but a lot of people use it separately. There's RSA Archer is another platform that's out there. Maplecroft is another for geopolitical, macroeconomic risk factors. What else? There's so many. I mean, they all tend to focus on certain things, and I think what you really want is to figure out, depending on the risk factors that you're trying to mitigate, which one most closely mirrors that. And so there's a lot of partnering in that kind of supply chain risk management technology environment right now, where there's a lot of companies that are figuring out, hey, I've got a sliver of this, there's another sliver over here. Companies need the bigger picture. There's a company called Bitvor as well that does some of it. So there's a lot of companies out there.
That's great, and actually leads right into the next question. Shout out to attendee Chris Carr. You were reading my thoughts with the questions and sending them over. Are there any that focus on a more sustainability focus? I mean, obviously that's something we're hearing from a lot of our members and companies is, sustainability, but also diversity when it comes to bringing on new suppliers and managing the supply chain. So I think the question really though is around sustainability options.
Yeah, the bringing on new suppliers, that one's a little trickier. And I do know that Enteros is trying to work on and has some capabilities from a sustainability perspective. And what they're doing is they've actually increased, I think they have 161 or 60-ish different variables that they look at. And they roll those up to some, kind of some macro categories, and sustainability is one of those. And so they're starting to try to look at the sustainability of the suppliers that many of you or other companies out there in any other industry for that matter may be using, and giving sustainability scores. And then you can set thresholds that say, if it's on a scale of 1 to 5, if it's below 3, flag it. I want to see it. And I want to determine if this is the right supplier for me, or do I need to take proactive corrective action is a good term for it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That really set the stage perfectly for the future discussion. So Joanne, I'd like to ask you to chime in here and share, with us how Abiomed views this topic and process. Oh, you're still muted, Joanne.
Sorry. So my thoughts are more, I'll call it traditional supply chain and not really systemic stuff. So it was really interesting to hear Jonathan's talk there. But one of the things that is definitely part of what we do that ties right into Jonathan's slides is just being aware of what's happening in the market, right? So we all know that we have to watch trends. I actually have been at Abiomed for only 4 years here, and before that I was in telecom and electronics. And we know the cyclical nature of what happens in electronics every period in time, and it's just about to happen again, right? So even though medical devices are a lot of plastic, there's also a lot of consoles and controllers, right, that drive all those things. So it's looking out and seeing what are the trends and trying to stay ahead of that. So that's probably one of the most important things. I think that, you know, at Abiomed, we are very focused on the business continuity side of supply chain. So maintaining appropriate levels of safety stock is, you know, one of the things that is, you know, what the teams get measured on, you know, where are we with our, you know, what percentage of stuff is not at safety stock? You know, that's a very clear standard purchasing metric. We also do a lot of what we call Kanban agreements, but it's basically supplier held inventory with our liability. So if we can kind of spread the liability throughout the system, but we are maintaining not only our level of safety stock, but WIP and finished goods and raw material levels at the supplier, that, you know, with good agreements, you can, the contract manufacturers or the OEM vendors can support that and support your vision of flexibility, but still maintain that continuity of the supply chain. So that's another area. We also, for some of our really critical suppliers, we've got very strategic supply agreements that we are, you know, have put in place so that we can extend the relationships, I would say. So a Kanban agreement we have probably with, I would say 60 to 70% of our suppliers, but these strategic agreements are where that OEM in most cases, technology is such that we really want to protect that for ourselves, and we want to protect it for continuity. So I think those strategic agreements are really important, and it covers everything from, you know, IP to security of supply. So I think that those are very important, and we don't do them for every supplier, but we do them for our key suppliers. One other thing that we have a lot of parts on our products that are very custom, and that's actually a risk mitigation in itself, right? Because if it's custom to you, you can have multiple different suppliers be able to make that part. Of course, you've got to get through all of your FDA approvals and MDR approvals and things, but you control it, all right? And so the more you control on your product, the better. But we do have a number of off-the-shelf, you know, we're gonna buy lures from the off-the-shelf guy that sells lures, right? But we need to have different strategies for that. So we actually have an off-the-shelf strategy that talks about how do we work with multiple distributors potentially for those off-the-shelf parts, and how do we maintain longer safety stocks. We have some safety stocks on some parts that you know, we may have gotten bitten with from certain suppliers in the past, where we say, you know what, we're going to hold a year's worth of inventory or more, because we know that there's an obsolescence risk as the market changes. That person is going to, or that company is going to move on to their next generation thing. And given all the regulatory approval cycles, we need to make sure that we have our own, not only our safety stock, but also make sure we're staying on top of all those trends, so we can get our last time buys and things like that, just to make sure that we have protection against all the regulatory in multiple areas. You know, it's one thing if you're just a US company, or if you're just a US and EU company, but once you start needing being global and really providing your devices globally, then all of those regulatory agencies don't all flip on a dime, right? So they are, you need to be able to have support of those longer term components, even if they go obsolete in the market. So that's kind of a big thing for us. From my team, I've got not only purchasing people, right, and supply logistics, but there's also a group of supplier engineers that their whole job is making sure that we do risk mitigation projects to stay ahead of all the regulatory submissions that we need to do. Second sourcing, third sourcing in some cases, depending on the volume, right? Again, one strategy that we've used is to really work with the development teams up front to think about second sourcing or multiple sourcing up front. So when we do our initial submissions, we are not just providing it for a single, you know, if you're in PMA, you have to submit every single second source or third source you've got. So we think about that up front so that we have the broadest capability in our supply chain to have mitigation against those longer term regulatory approvals that are needed. So the more you can get in that upfront regulatory approval, we found to be very helpful from a sourcing standpoint. We also talk to our suppliers all the time. I mean, I think that that's, probably should go without saying, but we have regular calls, we have regular management. I mean, my travel in this last year obviously hasn't been what it was before, but I was on the road, meeting with suppliers and doing our regular business reviews on multiple times a year. So I think that those are really important. The technology now has helped us do even supplier quality audits remotely, right, through Teams or Zoom, and it's kind of been a whole new world. But I think that we all in supply chain management, I think, have missed that personal touch. And so I can't wait to get my vaccine next week and be able to start getting life back to normal, and hopefully we can get back into that really bonding and relationship building with our suppliers. But part of that communication is also, I'd say, that kind of the regular probing, where are you? What is your current capacity for this? What is your current lead time? Especially this year, right? We've seen a lot of lead times flipping around. We've been pretty fortunate where we've been able to sustain and with some of these strategies kind of have been protected on the front end. But lead times have kind of flown all over the place this year. So we really are try to keep tabs with the suppliers on lead time changes, and then obsolescence queries. What are you seeing? Is this, especially things that you're buying from a distributor, making sure that you got that really good communication so you don't get surprised by an obsolescence. That's really important for those off-the-shelf parts. And then one other strategy, and I talked about these strategic suppliers that you have that maybe have some unique technology. So we've actually licensed their technology. So in some cases where we've had some things that suppliers that we felt were incredibly strategic, and we needed to have that protection because it was their IP, right? So we wanted that. So in a couple of cases recently, we've actually gone out, gotten license agreements for their technology, both to be able to use it, but also to be able to build it, so that we could either bring it in-house or we could transfer it to a contract manufacturer, and with their support to be able to basically provide that risk mitigation. So that's been a kind of a more recent thing that we've been doing, but it has proved very useful for some of our key technologies. And then this sounds funny, but actually insourcing. We've really looked at some parts of the business where we felt like there was a weakness in the supply chain, and we brought it in-house. We might have had like an equipment supplier that made this really cool thing, and they were doing it as a service. And we said, what if we just buy that equipment and bring it in-house and be able to, we still have that second source capability of outsourcing it, but we can also have that capability inside for our really key technical things. And then of course there is outsourcing, right? So we can even risk mitigate our own supply chain, our own internal manufacturing capacity, and outsource elements of our product manufacturing. So we have facilities in multiple geographic locations. So we look to have outsource partners in multiple geographic locations, right? So outsourcing effectively could be risk mitigation for your internal supply chain. And so we've been doing that as well. And so I think that those are like the big things. And I would just leave it with your best risk mitigation is communication, right? So there's communication and knowing what's going on and really working well with the suppliers. And there's an old adage is, you develop that relationship when things are going great, because when things don't go great, you really need that relationship to pull it through. And I'm a very firm believer in that, and making sure that we're building really strong relationships with the suppliers, because at the end of the day, it's a partnership, and we need to work like it's a partnership. And I think that's a really good risk mitigation.
Thanks,
so
Joanne.
That was fast, but I think I stayed in my 5 minutes. So.
No, you were great. I actually do have one question, if you don't mind. And this just kind of came up. I know obviously large companies are constantly looking, well, not constantly looking, but they're always scouting new technology and, make a lot of acquisitions. I know we have startup companies who are on the line. How does small company supply chain impact, right? If you're making an acquisition, like the Breathe acquisition was in the news in the last 6 months, how does that impact the way you view startup acquisitions? And then how do you manage that transfer?
Yeah, so we're kind of right in the middle of it now, right? So, you know, when we acquired Breathe, you know, one of the first things that my team was responsible for is, okay, let's just go and look at what their supply chain looks like, right? And understand where the key risks. We identified with them, of course, you know, because they knew the product better than we did. But with them, you know, who are the key risks? And the first thing we did is went out and really made a couple of really strong strategic agreements with those suppliers. The other thing we look at now is, you know, what is their supplier capacity as we expect this product to ramp, you know, so almost the exact same form letters, emails that we send out to say, hey, what's your lead time? What's your capacity? This, you know, sometimes we send it out once a year, sometimes twice a year, but all of those same things, we sent that out to their whole supply chain to understand what their capability was there. And then, you know, it's looking at, okay, well, what's custom and what's not custom, right? And so what do we need to protect on the not custom side? And then where, you know, any startup is going to use those quick turn suppliers, right? So where are those quick turn suppliers in their current supply chain that we want to get transferred to a more long-term supplier? So those are the kinds of things that, you know, we jumped in and looked at. I would say first is, you know, identify where your top 2 or 3 strategic risks are, because that's you know, you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck in there. And then you just kind of walk through all the regular stuff you do every year for your own risk mitigation, and you start applying it to that team. And again, you know, I'll say again, you know, developing relationships with that acquisition is really important, right? Because sometimes it's tough to be the acquiree. I've been on both sides of that equation in recent companies, and you know, I think that coming in and saying, oh, well, we know how to do this and you don't is definitely the wrong thing. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of learning that they have around their supply chain, and even as a startup, they kind of know where their risks are, and really it's just leveraging them and providing some additional support for that team to be able to expand their ramp and hopefully, you know, help save a lot of people.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joanne. We'll hear more from you in just a bit. But Arthur, please share with us a little bit about what Active Surgical is doing. And then we'd love to hear how smaller companies are kind of actively viewing this issue and what your processes are.
Sure. Can you see my screen?
We can, but it's not in
I'm gonna throw it.
presentation mode. Okay, perfect.
I'll throw in presentation mode. Give me 1 second. See if I can overcome my chair to keyboard interface issues. There we go. I think you should see it now. So, Jonathan and Joanne, thanks for what you presented, because it leads in perfectly to some of the stuff I'm going to talk about as you kind of drilled further back. And Joanne, you even talked about acquiring startups. Just for context, you know, I've had the good fortune of spending over half my career in the med device industry. 2 years ago, I decided to join a startup here in Boston. And so I'm just going to take a minute, and I just want to provide all of you with an understanding of what Active Surgical is. Active Surgical was founded in 2017 on the basis of autonomous surgical robotics. In 2018, they actually demonstrated proof of concept in the marketplace. And in having done so, there was a lot of technology that they had developed, and they realized there was an opportunity, knowing that surgical robotics will take a long time to get through the FDA. There was a lot of technology that they had developed that was immediately applicable to current minimally invasive surgery. And as such, this is our first product that we'll be looking to bring out in the summertime of 2021. What you see here in the upper left is just one of 3 components. There's also a large box build, and then there's a fiber optic assembly as well. And what you see in the lower left-hand corner is a view during minimally invasive surgery, demonstrating blood flow and perfusion in the body in real time. The technology that we're bringing to the market here in the near term is really all about providing views of physiology and anatomy that physicians can't see with traditional white light sources to aid and improve surgical outcomes, given the fact that surgical error is the number 3 cause of death in the United States. Kind of hard to believe when you think about it. Having said all that, a couple of things I joined the organization in September of 2019. So 3 months later, you start hearing about, a flu-like issue in Asia. 3 months after that, in March of last year, we find ourselves all working at home as I see all of my peers are on the panel today from their houses. And it was real obvious to me and the team at that point that there were a couple things we needed to do to make sure we were going to be protected and prepared to move to commercialization of our product in 2021. Joanne alluded to it earlier. Ongoing communication with development effort suppliers has been key to our efforts. And while we've had a number of them, we have focused on making sure that even if they weren't necessarily going to be utilized by our contract manufacturer as we've moved to that stage in the process, we've kept them engaged. We've kept them engaged because we have needs for development materials, but more so, given the fact that our volumes are small. It's our first product. Our volumes, we're worried about quantities on the order of magnitude of dozens, unlike, Insulet, and Peter will talk about later. Having worked there, I know they're dealing with millions in any given month for a given product. We're talking about dozens. So we've really found it's been advantageous because a lot of these suppliers, hoping for an opportunity to grow with our business, have actually taken a lot of their make to stock components that we were working with them on this last year and have held supplies of them, and have actually gotten us out of a pinch in near-term supply needs when we had requirements. Make to order. So contrary to everything I learned at General Electric and Covidien and some other large companies about just-in-time inventory and managing cash flow, knowing what was going on in the marketplace, knowing the risk that we were at in being displaced by larger and more preferred customers who were ordering on the order of magnitude much greater than ours, we made a point of placing orders for make to order product as quickly as we could. As soon as we knew that part of the device design was locked down and there wasn't a fear of change. And, subsequently it was a great decision because we did see a lot of it get shifted during the course of that production and come later than what was originally quoted, because we were displaced by those others, but hasn't proved to be a problem for us in preparation for our development assembly, and then our march toward production later this year. And then lastly, purchasing of printed circuit board assembly components. It was a decision we made relatively early last year, being concerned about the pandemic and the impact it would potentially have on electronics. We went ahead and locked in, even though we knew we were going to go through one, maybe two revisions of printed circuit board assemblies. We felt that the risk was warranted to go ahead and order components based on the configurations we had at that time and deal with either restocking fees later or just having parts that we'd have to eat once the changes are made to our product structure. There was just too much risk in the marketplace otherwise. Again, not the practices I'd necessarily would have taken in some of the other businesses I had been in, but given what we're trying to do as a startup and get this first product to market, those were really necessary steps during this last year. I'm going to just take a minute as well and talk about points of leverage and obtaining insights and priority when you do need it with suppliers, or you just want to know what's going on in the marketplace. Obviously, we all have access to, whatever general news sources there are. But one thing that I found real advantageous is the fact that when I initially joined the company and we started looking for contract manufacturers, we started by talking to a couple of the larger tier one global contract manufacturers that Carlos alluded to earlier. And then we also were dealing with ones that were local here in Massachusetts, or those that dealt with some of the larger US med device companies across the United States. Through those relationships, and even though we opted not to go with the larger tier one suppliers, they've still granted me access on a regular basis to their supply chain reports and risk studies over the course of the last year and a half. Granted, that's in part because they want to maintain a relationship with us in the hopes that if our business takes off, we'll need a global contract manufacturer of the size and scope of those firms. But it was just a great opportunity to take advantage of that and have really some best-in-class insights throughout the last year. OEM relationships fostered during development efforts. I talked earlier about distribution relationships and them holding on to some supplies. There are a lot of OEMs that our engineers spent time with talking about how we needed to go about applying their product, what the best versions of their devices or products were for our given application. And we found them to be great sources in a time of need. Again, because we're looking for quantities that are on an order of magnitude much smaller than most, we make phone calls to these OEMs, and often they can find a way to get us a couple of dozen if we need them. And then lastly, just one great example, we were in a real pinch last year in trying to obtain GPUs from one of the larger chip manufacturers here in the United States, and that market's gotten extremely tight. We ended up reaching out to one of our board of directors because we realized he had a relationship with one of the principals at that organization, and it was great. Within a day, you know, we had one of the vice presidents of that organization basically advocating on our part and finding us the materials we needed. So, you know, really a lot of it comes back to, I think, what Joanne talked about, which is relationships, constant communication, and looking for all those different means and sources of insight and information where you can get it, and contacts when you need that material. Again, it gets a lot more difficult when you're looking for large volumes, but as a startup, this has proven to be real effective for us.
That's great. One quick question, I think, before we move on. Obviously, at a startup, you're balancing budget versus wants. You know, you'd love to have the best option for suppliers. You'd love to stay local if you can. You'd love to work with it. But how do you balance that kind of, the budget is the budget first versus the how to think big picture about setting up supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, it largely comes by having a breadth of potential suppliers available to you so that you can get, you know, the best overall value in looking at that group of suppliers. Obviously, cost is critically important. The budget is the budget, as you alluded to, Rachel. There's only so much money till we raise the next round of funding. But we also had to balance that with some of the realities of COVID-19. So again, it was about volume. It was about going out there and really bidding out to 4, 5, and 6 suppliers or contract manufacturers at a time, so that we could judge things on the broadest set of criteria possible, and then in doing so, leverage what business we had to get the best price.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Arthur. That's great. Okay, so before we move on to our last section of the session, which is the reverse pitch, I need something from you, our attendees, and I'm going to ask you to participate in a polling question. So to give you a little background, obviously we all know this past year has been crazy, and things are starting to look like we're going to be going back to a new normal. As members and our board of directors and our working groups come together, we're trying to get a pulse of what the industry is planning for going back to the office full time versus giving employees a remote model option, hybrid. And this is really so we can best understand what the medtech industry is going to do in compared to other technologies and industries. So I'm going to launch 2 poll questions. If you wouldn't mind selecting the best answer, these are anonymous, so your information will not be shared with us or with any of the participants. But we'd really like to know if your company has given you an indication of what they're going to do. And then the second question is going to be actually around your preference. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what you'd like to do. We know many of you have been involved in actively being in the office in manufacturing and labs, but as we all go back to what will be the new normal, we're trying to gauge what the industry is going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that first poll, and it'll give you just a few seconds to answer. If you would, it should pop up on your screen, and then I'll ask you one more question. Thank you all, you're all voting, which is fantastic. Okay, most of you have chimed in. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds so we don't take up too much time. I want to leave plenty of time for our reverse pitch. Okay, Last call. And I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and launch the second question for you, if I can. And panelists, I'll allow you to vote this time. Sorry, I left you guys out last time. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the second one. All right, I see most of you have voted. Just going to give it another few seconds if you want to get those last votes in. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Thank you all so much for doing that. You know, we're really trying to gauge, as we said, the pulse of the industry, and your participation is incredibly helpful for us. Okay, now to what I will call our main event. We are going to transition to our last segment, which is our reverse pitch with Joanne and Peter. And I cannot thank you both enough for taking the time to do this. I will say this is absolutely, audience, your time to ask questions. You have 2 captive presenters here. Please put them in the Q&A. Just for the few of you that did ask some questions during the last session in Q&A, I'm going to get to those in this section because I felt like they were more appropriate here, but they definitely will be asked. So Joanne, I'm going to ask you to kick us off and talk to us about, you know, what it's like to try to interact with Abiomed. You've given a great understanding, you know, earlier of the supply chain and risk mitigation, but talk to us about how to get on your list. What are you looking for? What are your challenges? How should people interact with you? I'll let you take over.
I think everybody has my number now anyways. I get so many phone calls from so many places, but anyways, so the, yeah, I think that we're looking at, you know, we did talk about the fact that, you know, we look at insourcing stuff. We also look at outsourcing stuff, both from a component standpoint, as well as from a contract manufacturing standpoint. Growing up in the electronics and telecommunications realm, I lived in contract manufacturing. So to be in a company again that actually does its own manufacturing is unique for me. So I'm very used to working with contract manufacturers. But, you know, we look for, especially, you know, we're a medical device, right? So the number one thing we look for is quality, right? And the number 2 is continuity of supply, right? Those are 2. It's like, make sure I get good parts and make sure I get good parts on time, right? Those are our number 1 and 2 things. We also need flexibility because, you know, as Carlo talked earlier, I mean, this year was a crazy year, right? Things went up, things went down, elective parts of the business slowed down, but other parts of it, you know, heated up because, you know, great thing is when your product can help save even more lives, it's a wonderful thing, right? So we need to have that flexibility of, you know, being able to go up and down. So I think that is really important. The financial stability of a CM is probably one of the most important things. Back in my early electronics days, I got burnt by this really bad where we had a CM who couldn't afford to pay their suppliers, which, oh, by the way, meant that they couldn't build our product because they couldn't get my parts. So that is one of the things working with contract manufacturers, really looking at, you know, what is their financial stability. You know, there's the big handful of folks out there that, you know, are pretty stable, but you know, that might not be a fit for your small to medium-sized business. So making sure that that's the right fit is also good. You know, for me, always being a big fish in a small to medium-sized pond was sometimes better than being a small fish in a very big contract manufacturer's pond. So, you know, you've got to kind of balance that capability and strength of the big CM with maybe those middle tier where you can be a more important player. So I think that that's another aspect here. What is their supplier management like? You know, so we need to have supplier management for them, but what is their supplier management team like, and how are they at going out and chasing parts and working with their sub-suppliers that used to be your sub-suppliers if you're outsourcing stuff that's internal. So I think that's a capability that I really look at when I'm evaluating contract manufacturers. What is their ease of hiring? You know, the market also on labor really flexes, right? Are they in a geography that's easy for them to hire people? And on the geographic side, we right now have very few Asia suppliers, just some electronics. For the most part, all of our suppliers are in either EU or US. And that's a decision that we've made. And, so that's, but it impacts, for us, it's, logistics, right? You don't want something getting stuck. In this last year, even, some of the big, 3 and 5 letter name logistics companies had a lot of issues with logistics this year, back and forth in and out of countries. So with the reduced number of flights, those logistics providers that had their own fleet was a little bit better, right, than the people that had to get room on a commercial airline, because there wasn't as much commercial airline going on. So I think that proximity to your main location, especially if you're outsourcing things like sub-assemblies that still have to come into you, that's a very big consideration. And like I said, their labor pool, like, are they in the place where they can actually attract labor? Because that's effectively, in a lot of cases, you're subcontracting that labor aspect of the business. And then, really identifying a supplier that's the right fit for you. If you have something that's highly automated, well, is there a CM that's got that highly automated capability? Or are you more manual labor that you need to be able to have people, they need to have access to the people, and they have to, follow good, people management skills as well as other things. And of course, I put at the bottom of the list, and cost, of course, is very important, right? If no supply chain person can ever say that cost isn't important, but I will say that, quality, flexibility, and continuity of supply are definitely number 1, 2, and 3. But cost is always important, and that gets into, also the geographic things, right? Shipping stuff back and forth across the ocean isn't cheap, right? So you've got to consider that as well. So I think those are the things that I look at, and I'll bring that word relationship back. You want to work with somebody who you can build that relationship with, and I think that's, at the end of the day, I negotiate an awful lot of contracts in my job, and the best contract is the one you fight over and fight over and fight over, and then you put it in the drawer because you have a fantastic relationship with that supplier at the end of the day. So that's kind of, but that's what I'm looking for, is that type of relationship that can be built and meet those different criteria.
Fantastic. So I definitely have questions, selfishly from my background of working with product development teams and designs and engineers, I'd love to hear, from your perspective, how often are you guys outsourcing any of the development work versus just the contract manufacturing and components? And that may be more on the R&D teams, but what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so we do outsource some development, not so much with the core product, but a lot of the accessory products. We do, have outsourced development, and sometimes we have a rough design, but we're not planning on bringing that manufacturing in-house for this, let's call it an introducer, right? And so we might work with contract manufacturers who have a strength in creating that manufacturing process to be able to build that thing. So we might, and then of course, once you develop the process, you always tweak the design, right? So that's probably an area where we do the most. But we have, we work very closely with the design teams, the R&D teams, and the development teams to identify the right suppliers, whether it's a contract manufacturer or a core component or a custom component. We have a number of like machining parts or extrusion parts or plastic molded parts that all, you have to find that right fit, and you have to balance I think one of the biggest learnings that you have is balancing the expectations of the supplier with their capability, right? So you're working with design and they want everything perfect, and it's plus or minus 0.00001, right? And you have to understand enough about the manufacturers or the contract manufacturers or the component manufacturers' capabilities so that you can be that middleman between development and the supplier to get to a place where you can agree to, okay, well, this is a reasonable tolerance to expect, right? And let's make sure we have the design flexible enough or capable enough to meet that. Or you say, okay, it has to be this tight, then you have to go and find that right supplier that is, or suppliers, hopefully, that can make it to that to that level of precision. So I think that there's a lot with both dealing with internal development as well as outsourcing some of that development.
Fantastic. So you said you're pretty sure everyone has your phone number at this point, but okay, so who are the types of suppliers that reach out most, and who do you wish actually reached out a little bit more? What's on your, man, I wish I had someone to do this list?
So I would say logistics guys are the ones that reach out the most. You're in your title is supply chain and logistics. Everybody who's got a trucking company is the number one. Also seem to get a lot of like injection molded plastics and custom machining metals. Those are the ones that I see regularly. Probably based on my past history, I get some electronics pings, but not so much at Abiomed as I obviously used to get it in past companies. And who do I wish called me more? I'm not sure I want to answer that question because I think my cell phone number is already out in the thing. But no, I mean, I am looking for at different contract manufacturers, and right now that we've got some suppliers that have contract manufacturing capabilities, and so that is an area where I would say that they probably don't reach out as much to Abiomed because Abiomed does have a lot of internal manufacturing. But as we're looking to grow our internal capability and capacity, maybe outsourcing some of those non-critical elements is an area that I'm actually looking at right now. So this was fortuitous.
So, okay. Couple really quick questions.
Except for the hundreds of phone calls I'm going to get after this, but besides that.
Well, see, we're not going to share your information. So we did get a couple questions. What's the best way to interact with you? So how should they reach out to your team? Is there a generic email they should send a note to? And then on the R&D side, so if they're looking to kind of connect with R&D or engineers about how to potentially connect, is there a general way you can advise people to go that direction?
Yeah, so I actually think that if you want to get me, the contact information is pretty readily available out in the internet land, and that's probably how most people between LinkedIn and websites. I think that's there. I think that's probably the best. I mean, we do have some internal like purchasing at, but that's probably not the right place for people to start with that. So I think that probably just reaching out, directly, and my team is also, a conduit. If we think something is available or interesting to a certain design team from a supplier, then we will forward that information there. So
okay, so for the audience, I will reach out to Joanne after this, and she will give me the correct ways to get in touch, and then I will share that with you. That way, but I will send that out in an email with the best preferred route, so we're not Joanne's not getting 3,000 phone calls. I'm gonna have to get
creative here.
Exactly.
No trucking companies, please.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And then, one of the other, a little more specific question is, as specific, regulations kind of change, and we touched on this a little bit with the last discussion, how that impacts your supply chain, as things are shifted due to, sterilization, right, is obviously something that's going to be.
Yeah, I saw that question pop up. Yeah.
Curious how you guys are looking at that perspective.
Yeah, so we're, we sterilize with ETO as a lot of med device companies do. And, we are very on top of what's happening with different sterilization services being, shut down in a certain state, right? Or, and it really did cause a lot of capacity constraints for a short term. We have multiple sterilizers qualified, both here and in Europe. So, one of the first things we did is make sure that all of our products that we sterilize in the US, we also have qualified our EU supplier, right? Because the focus seemed to have been US. We also have some OEMs that provide us sterilized accessories, and we made sure that they had facilities in offshore in some cases, or multiples in some of our EU suppliers that they had multiple different sterilization services that they could use. So that is definitely something we actually have, you know, policy people within the company who are right on top of all the any discussion about regulations around ETO. I know that some of the industry groups like AdvaMed is very involved in understanding what's staying on top of that and if there's any potential regulations coming down there. So it's mostly de-risking and making sure that we have additional sterilization capabilities for not only our product as well as some of our OEM products.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate your
So now
time.
I don't have
today.
to
You've
finish
been incredible.
typing the note that I was there.
There you go. That's perfect. Thanks. Okay, Peter, you have been sitting so patiently this entire time. I am going to turn the floor over to you to talk to us about Insulet. You know, you've heard a few of the questions that came into Joanne. I would imagine they're going to be somewhat similar for you, but we've got some other questions as well. So please, the floor is yours.
So if you prefer, I have a presentation. If not, I can go right into the question part if that works for you. But I think it was interesting listening to Joanne and Arthur and Jonathan talking about risk management on the supply chain side. You know, this is going to sound like motherhood and apple pie, and I apologize, but it's an oversimplification. But you know, you can't use the word supplier and partner interchangeably, because I think there's a key difference. A supplier simply trades parts for money, and a partner works with you in conjunction with you. And I think some of our best suppliers / partners are people that we've been able to help each other's business and look at things in a way that we're being strategic and enabling growth in each other's business. And I think getting to that level of relationship and sharing is really going to be your best risk mitigation going forward.
So I would then ask, how can they do that, right? So if you're not reaching out and they reach out to you, or, you know, in an area, obviously where in the last year we've gone from no, you know, in person, everyone's virtual, sending emails and getting things lost in the boxes. What's the best way to try to start developing that relationship with you guys?
No doubt about it. It's been very difficult this year. I mean, I echo what Joanne said. I mean, you know, a lot of times I've spent, you know, face-to-face visits. I'm more effective face-to-face. There's nothing like sitting across the table and talking something out and negotiating or arguing a point or getting through. But I think, you know, in many ways, the pandemic has forced us to try to, you know, utilize Zoom calls and phone calls and other ways to just really stay in touch, because the traditional methods haven't been as, you know, available to us because of the situation. I think, you know, what evolves over time is it's not a one-step thing where you become a partner. It's an evolution, right? It's something that, you know, you start off and you're supplying components, you're working with the supplier, do a QBR, you open a conversation, and someone says, hey, look, I noticed that you have this situation going on in your business, and here's how I can help. And that's how it's all about that value creation. And, you know, when I'm looking at suppliers to get into that kind of partnership level, I'm looking for someone that can help me with that value creation. And what are my challenges? You know, in Insulet, you know, certainly we're in a very strong growth mode. As Arthur mentioned before, we have a pretty high volume of production. And so it's all about scalability and scaling our parts and our tooling and our supplies in a way that is cost effective. It manages to help us get a better, you know, lower our CapEx per product, you know, but also most importantly, of course, maintaining our quality and doing it in an effective way.
So how, you know, how often are you sitting down and going through and saying, these are our big needs right now, this is what we project our largest needs to be in the next 6 months? You know, how often are you doing that internally? And, you know, how do you disseminate that information?
Sure. So I think we have category strategies that we have on a regular basis with the category managers on my team to really review what's going on with our strategic initiatives inside the company and where we see things are going. And then we, as necessary, we you know, which is very frequently, we bring in the suppliers into that conversation. We present them with those challenges and ask them to think outside of, you know, we want them to leverage their expertise in their category area to help us, you know, to give us the knowledge that we don't have. You know, we're good generalists, but you know, an injection molder or metal stamper has forgotten more about their manufacturing technique and how to do things than any of my category managers will ever know. And my guys are very good. Don't get me wrong; they understand the stuff quite well. But you know, they don't live on the factory. They don't understand their process. They don't live it day in and day out.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Joanne then. Components versus outsourcing engineering design services. How often are you all working with outsourced partners for product development? And how often are you trying to keep all of that in-house?
You know, for our product development, a lot of the work is proprietary, and we try to do a lot of that internally. It's not to say we don't have consultants that help us with different areas of that, but I would say predominantly the responsibility of product development is internal. We do leverage our supply base to help us to, you know, it's very similar to what Joanne had said, is that we do leverage our suppliers to help us bring it into production. And, you know, of course, it's an evolution of, you know, our engineer thinks we can build 1 million a week of this in this way, but it's not, you know, the tool doesn't work, or something's not quite right where you can get the right quality and the right volume. And so we need that confidence and that advice from our partners to tell us that, look, you know, I know what you're trying to do. Have you thought about this other method? And so we do leverage them. And in some cases, we've brought in suppliers to say that, look, you know, as we're scaling our volumes and we need to go into, you know, higher cavitation tools or shorter cycle times, what are some of the strategies you would take? And so we have brought suppliers in to help us with those types of studies, and you know, they're yielding some very nice results.
We did get a question in the chat about the MediCred certification program. You know, it's something we've heard a decent amount about lately. Is that something that's on your radar at Insulet? Is that something that you look for with suppliers?
I have not looked for it yet. No, I have not.
Okay. That's good to know. Joanne, would you mind me asking, I forgot to ask you as well, is that something you guys look for at Abiomed, the MediCred emerging certification?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's something that I'll have to look into, but I haven't put it on our CTQs yet.
Cool. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I do have one more question, Peter.
Yes.
Local versus overseas, right? Obviously, we have a lot of local companies working here in Massachusetts and in New England. You have to balance, obviously, budget, logistics, timing, capabilities, but how much preference do you give to, you know, local teams so you can interact with them closely versus outside of New England area?
Okay, no, that's a great question. And in fact, it speaks to one of our strategies that we put in. You know, a couple of years ago, we started our own manufacturing facility here in Acton, Massachusetts. And when we were setting up the supply chain for that, our primary supply was through contract manufacturer in China. And our strategy that we said was we wanted to be dual sourced, regionally located, and cross-qualified. And so if I could check those 3 boxes for every component that I have, I'd be very successful. I wish I was there, but we're very far along that path. But one of the things that we did do is 80% of the BOM value that's in our Acton facility is within 100 miles of our plant. And that was on purpose. You know, it's for flexibility of supply. It's for being able to interact. We do have suppliers in Massachusetts and in the United States that supplies our CMs in Asia. And often that's because of the complexity of the part, and sometimes there's a need for our engineers and quality people to interact with those suppliers closely to get through any issues that come up over time.
Great. So we did have one last question kind of come through. How is NDR and EU requirements kind of, obviously it's on your radar, how's that impacting your plans moving forward and decisions you make for suppliers?
Peter, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Joanne. You go. I'm not sure.
So, yeah, I think that it's not yet impacting new suppliers. It's significantly impacting the amount of data that we need to gather from current suppliers. And we actually just did a full evaluation of, how are we going to handle this over the past, year we've been looking at this. But I mean, it's everything from how do we need to change our labels on our own product to how do we confirm all of the material components or constituents of all of the components that we have in our product. And we actually decided, we did a first pass on one of our products and literally just solicited information from, all those key suppliers. And we've actually just invested in a third-party software package to help us trigger that not only will manage on an ongoing basis that communication with all of our suppliers, but not just for MDR, but also for REACH and California Prop 65 and the new changes that even continue to happen on ROHS, which I've been dealing with since I was a very young engineer. So so that we decided that that was our best approach instead of the consistent and constant checking on what are all these regulation changes to hire this third party that has a software tool that will help us manage that better. So that's the decision that we just made to handle that.
Peter, anything to add?
Not really. This isn't my area of expertise. I think in terms of the MDR, it's probably a very similar approach. I think we are using third parties to collect that data for us. And it's not really managed with, I don't have a lot more to add to that.
It's really understandable.
I don't know enough to add more to it.
Well, if anyone on the call is interested, we will be doing a program on that at our town hall at the end of next month. We'll be talking a lot about Brexit, EU MDR, and the opportunities and changes that people do need to be concerned about. So we are right up on time, and I just want to take the last moment to say thank you so much to our speakers, Joanne, Arthur, Mike, Peter, Jonathan, who had to jump off. You all have been absolutely fantastic, and this has been a wonderful, wonderful program. To attendees, thank you so much for joining us. We will be turning this recorded content into a YouTube program that we will share with you. We'll also make sure you get the link to Carlo's manufacturing report, because that is an outstanding product that you're going to want to review later. And Carlo, thank you so much. I think he had to jump off too, but what a wonderful, wonderful program. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you all again for joining us. We hope to see you soon.